It is good to be together this morning. I made a mistake. I know that's not what you wanted to hear, but it's true. I admit it. Today is the Del Taco food pantry fundraiser. So go today. Don't go tomorrow. Go today. Thank you, Christy, for bringing that to our attention, and I'm sorry that I goofed it up at first. Go today and help out with that. I was in Kerrville, Texas last fall. I was down there to see my son Tony in a play. And while we were there, we worshiped with him and at the congregation he was at, and the preacher brought a message about Andrew. And it got me to thinking about Simon Peter's brother and the things that he went through in his life. And I want to share some of those with you this morning. But when you stop and you think about something about that, the first thought that came to my mind was the way that he acted. And it reminded me of something that I do all the time. It goes like this. Have you seen, you fill in the blank, movie? Now, I don't know about you, but I remember when Jaws came out. Have you seen Jaws? And people say, no, is it good? No. Yeah. I don't know. And then, and we do that, but we do that with movies that we really like. I remember being able to say, have you seen the movie Brian's Song? How many of you remember Brian's Song? James Caan, played Brian Piccolo, the running back that had cancer and died, and Gail Sayers. That was a great show. And then my second one that I remembered that doing is, have you seen The Natural yet? I asked that to one good friend of mine. He said, The Natural what? I said, The Natural, the baseball movie. And then there was Field of Dreams. And I think about those things. I think about all those movies that I really, really enjoyed. And when you think about it, it's exciting. Think about this. Look at these passages with that in your mind. The next day, John saw Jesus coming toward him and said, look, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. This is the one I meant when I said, a man who comes after me has surpassed me because he was before me. I myself did not know him, but the reason I came baptizing with water was that he might be revealed to Israel. The next day, John was there again with two of his disciples. And when he saw Jesus passing by, he said, look, the Lamb of God. When the two disciples heard him say this, they followed Jesus. Turning around, Jesus saw them follow him and asked, what do you want? They said, Rabbi, which means teacher, where are you staying? Come, he replied, and you will see. So they went and they saw where he was staying, and they spent that day with him. It was about 4 p.m. Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, was one of the two who heard what John had said and who had followed Jesus. The first thing Andrew did was to find his brother Simon and tell him, we have found the Messiah, that is the Christ. And he brought him to Jesus, and Jesus looked at him, being Peter, and said, you are Simon, son of John. You will be called Cephas, which when translated is Peter. How many of you enjoy going to the theater? I mean, think about it. You go to the movies for the popcorn and all those things and the things that are going on, and you go to the IMAX for the experience. You watch that movie that makes you sick. It's kind of a crazy thing, but here's one of my favorites. Glory. This past week, my son Tim and I sat down and watched this. It was the first time that he had been able to see it. But I remember the first time that I saw it, that I took my oldest son Jeff with me, and we went and we watched this movie together. But I wanted to see the reaction that Tim would have, because I love the story. First of all, I love anything that has to do with the American Civil War. And it was something that I've always studied and I've had a kind of a kindred spirit with and love learning about it. But this is based on a true story about the Civil War and the first black regiment to fight against the oppression of the South and slavery. I wanted Tim, my youngest son, to experience and see the same things that I had seen and experienced with his older brother. But that's only a movie. It was called Glory for a reason. Now, if you take that thought and you look at it and you think about, well, what's John the Baptist got to do with going to see a movie? John the Baptist was eager to tell others about something so much more important than he was, more important than any story he could have told at any time. Look, John declared, the Lamb of God that takes away the sin of the world. As he was talking to those two men, this picture came to me on the internet, but it was something I thought, man, I could put myself in that picture and be a part of that and understand where that's coming from. Down through the centuries, the Lamb of God has been one of the most cherished symbols of the Jesus Christ held by the believers. Those who believe that he was the Son of God, that he was crucified. But we're living in a world in which is filled with people who know nothing about this Lamb of God. More and more people are refusing to accept the responsibilities of their actions toward the Lamb of God. It's more convenient and less painful, it seems, to blame someone else for the problems of the world. Maybe like that of other racial groups or women or men or parents and the like. Maybe it's easier to blame someone else than it is to take responsibility onto ourselves. The Jews placed their sins symbolically on a scapegoat and drove him out into the wilderness. They lay their hands on him and place those sins, the priest would, and they'd take him to the city gate and they'd throw him out and they'd send him out in the wilderness. It may have helped them cope with the guilt, but it didn't get to the crux of the problem of sin. And that's what our world has got to come to, an understanding of what sin is about. And God did get to the crux of that problem. And it was a scapegoat of sorts. But he did it in the person of his Son. Jesus took our sins to the cross when he was crucified. And through accepting this fact through faith, God enables us not only to evade the guilt of our sins for a time, but he frees us from their power so that we can live victorious lives. Now, those of us who are of white or Caucasian or whatever cannot fathom the pain of racial prejudice that the African Americans and other minorities in our world face. It wasn't just against blacks. It wasn't just against blacks. It was something that happened. We serve whites only, no Spanish or Mexicans. Help wanted, white only. Irish need not apply. Whites only by order. Too many people in our country, they believe that white is right and all others are nothing. And we still live in that world today. And someone says, well, it's that way on both sides. It is. That's why I brought these others up. Guys, we've got to get to a point where we understand it's not about what the color of our skin is, but about the content of our heart. I'm thankful for this congregation for being as open as it is, but still lingering in our world. There are people who still harbor those bitter differences and problems from long ago. I'm sure many of you remember the riot that followed that first Rodney King trial in Los Angeles. In that riot, a white truck driver was pulled out of his truck and brutally beaten by some young black men after Rodney King was beaten by white police officers, as is depicted here in this picture. This man named Reginald Oliver Denny, after the announcement and pronouncement of the sentence against the men that beat Rodney King was pronounced, some of the men rioted and some of the families and some of the people rioted in Los Angeles. And one of the men took a brick and threw it with force at the head of a hapless driver whose name I mentioned, Mr. Denny. Sometime later, the man who threw the brick at Denny and Reggie Denny were both invited to be on a talk show. This is what Mr. Denny looked like after his surgeries. But when they came together, that's Denny in the middle shaking hands with the man who threw the brick at him. See, Denny is a Christian, and he doesn't blame or hate those who attacked him. In fact, he said that he'd rather have not pressed charges, and if it was left up to him, he would not have. He even seems to excuse the actions of this man as the other man excused the actions on the account of the conditions that he was living in. To forgive is wonderful, but should he also release them from the responsibility of their actions? The man who threw the brick, Mr. Washington, says he's sorry for the harm that he caused Mr. Denny, but he's also stated that he does not entirely regret participating in the riot. The audience in the studio was quiet, but they were agitated because they felt that he wasn't really sorry for what he had done. He was not really ready to confess what he had done was wrong. And I think that the audience intuitively understood that Mr. Washington could not rise above his past sins until he owned up and confessed his own. The reason I bring this up is not because of any problem. I don't like this. But this is a problem that is facing our world today. Because in our world today, we live in a world that does not acknowledge the fact that we sin. Or that if we caught in our sin, it's not our fault. It's not my fault. What happened to me is a result of the way I was raised. Or what happened to me is a result of where I live. Or what happened to me is a result of how I was taught. There is no personal responsibility. We want to lay it off on somebody else. If the church isn't growing, then we need a new preacher. If the church is having trouble keeping members, then we're not visiting enough, and somebody's not doing their job. Or if there's a mistake made, then somebody's messed up. It's not my fault. What it boils down to this is we don't need a scapegoat. We need to lay our sins at the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. But it takes admitting and confessing those sins. And when we do this, we find peace and a joy that passes all understanding. And it's a great feeling to be able to take those burdens and lay them at the feet of God. I mean, have you noticed that people don't sin anymore? We make mistakes. Oh, I'll admit I made a mistake, but it's really not a sin. Have you ever heard that? I have. Hey, folks, I have said that, haven't you? Or at least thought it. We slip up, we become temporarily insane or ill, or we don't sin. I mean, we don't make a mistake. We don't sin, we just make mistakes. And when we can't figure out who to blame or point at to make sure that we're not the ones that are getting charged with this, we throw up our arms and say, it just happened. I'm sorry, it just happened. I didn't intend to cheat on my wife, it just happened. Who knows, maybe aliens from outer space are taking possession of my body when things just happen like that. When John pointed to Jesus as the Lamb of God, the two disciples both followed him. Why? He said, behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. What were those men that were with John interested in? Getting rid of the sins of the world. That was their whole concept. And when Jesus saw them, he asked, what do you want? And I don't know that they quite knew what they wanted, except that they were told, here is Jesus. He's going to take away the sins of the world. I'm not sure what they thought. But their question was, Rabbi, where are you staying? And then Jesus issued this statement, come and you will see. Jesus' first call of men. And it was really a kind of a low-key approach, don't you think? Come and you will see. They were told, behold Jesus, the Lamb of God, who takes away the sin of the world. And when they found Jesus, they said, where are you staying? He says, come and you will see. How difficult is that? Come and see. It's an invitation to examine the life of Christ. That's something that we need to understand. It's a request that these men might come to know him, to enter into a relationship with him and his family. I mean, Christ didn't try to sell himself. He didn't get up and beat his own drum. He merely invited them to come and discover for themselves, and they apparently liked what they saw. Apparently Andrew did too, because the first thing he did was find his brother Peter and tell him, we have found the Messiah. That was something and someone that they were looking for hundreds of years, waiting diligently as faithful Jews, waiting for the deliverer to come, waiting for him to be there. See, Andrew realized he didn't have to burden. He didn't have the burden of changing people. All he had to do, listen folks, Andrew understood that he did not carry within him the burden to change people's lives. What he did have was the responsibility to show people Jesus. You don't bear the burden of changing lives. That's God's work. And if you think it's yours, you're mistaken. You can't do that. There's only one person that can change my life, and that's me. But I thank God that I was introduced to Jesus. How about you? Can you imagine any greater gift to give someone than an introduction? I remember whenever I was introduced to my wife, the second time. The first time, the introduction didn't go too well. The second time, oh man. It was as if the angels set a light. I won't get into that. I'll never forget that moment. When somebody said, do you know Lisa Bird's here? And I said, yeah. And I am so proud that I walked across that gymnasium floor to see if that was really her. And that was an important day in my life. But the most important day in my life was whenever somebody said, let me tell you about Jesus. Because it started a walk with God unlike any walk that I'd ever walked before. Come and see. Come and see. See, we have no trouble at all telling people that they ought to see a certain movie. There's this show on MSN called Go See This Movie. I have never watched this. I just came across this on the internet, but it fit. And I thought, you know, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Go see this movie. All we've got to do is come see Jesus. Come and see Jesus. Why then is it so hard for us to tell others that they ought to come and see him? We can talk about movies. We can talk about grandbabies. By the way, Effie and Kay Jackson are proud great-grandparents again as of yesterday. Great news. Everybody wants to hear those kinds of things. Everybody thinks that's really a great opportunity to get to hear those things. And we don't mind sharing. Hey, did y'all know the Rangers lost last night? I was there. Andy, it was ugly. Wasn't it? Ugly. The night before was ugly. And I don't mind talking to you about that, but you know, I'm not so sure I want to talk to you about Jesus. Why? Because he's really not that important to me. I can relate to you in baseball. I can relate to you about my grandchildren. But see, I'm not sure where you stand with Jesus. Duh. Why do you not know how somebody stands with Jesus? Well, Well, I don't want to pry. The guy behind me was yelling for the Astros, 2 rows back. I used to yell for the Astros, but my thought was, why don't I turn around and tell him, why don't you go back to Houston? Just in jest, for those of you who don't know me. I was upset. But how many friends do I have that don't know Jesus? How many friends do you have that don't know Jesus? We'll tell them to go see a movie. We'll tell them that they ought to go see some great movie. Why can't we just tell them about Jesus? See, Andrew, the other disciple of John, and the other disciple of John had been searching for something. They were Jewish men. They were searching to fill the voids in their lives, something to give them meaning and purpose. And that day, they found it. And today, there are still many people like those 2 disciples who are hearing this idea of religion and understanding that there's a God and understanding that there's religion in this world, and all they're waiting for is a relationship. Somebody to come up and say, do you know Jesus? Let me tell you about my relationship with Jesus. So why then is it so difficult? To those of us who have been born again, those of us who have been changed permanently because of our relationship with the true God and Savior. Shouldn't we be at least as excited to invite others to come and experience this amazing event that we call worship? We tell them they ought to go see some great movie. But can we be like those 2? Because life is difficult. Life is frustrating. Life is lonely. Life can be very meaningless because without Jesus Christ in our lives, to a lot of people, there's absolutely no meaning in their life. Absolutely none at all. And in this day and age, there are so many things that we use to fill up our time. Many people spend hours at a time at home alone in front of computers, televisions, video games. And that's been referred to in the scientific world of family development and family psychology as cocooning. Wrapping ourselves up inside of our own homes. We become a society that cuts ourselves off from God and from each other. We become practical atheists. I believe in God, but I don't want to force my religion on anyone else. That's atheistic, folks. That's saying I don't believe that God can work in my life. I don't want to bother them with my religion. I don't want them talking to me about their religion. I don't want to share with them about Jesus because, frankly, I don't want to hear what they think. Many people used to sit on their front porches and enjoy their day and chat with neighbors. Now we've moved from our front porches to our back patios where we build fences and plant trees so we can have that privacy. I mean, what's going on with that picture? Why are we hiding? I mean, even children don't seem to play outdoors anymore. I've got a friend of mine that moved to up north, and he lived up there, and he was living there. I said, well, how do you like your neighborhood? He said, you know what? There's a lot of kids here. I said, there are? He said, yeah. I said, well, what took you so long to figure that out? I said, you've been up there almost 9 months. He said, you know, I didn't know there were any kids here until that last big snow we had, and people started going and playing outside. He said, Britt, I counted 45 kids on my street alone. So I never see them. So I always leave early and get back late after all the kids have been, you know, before they go to school and after they get home. He said, I don't see them. We cocoon. We slide into our homes, and all these gadgets and devices that we're buying amaze us. It seems that we're shutting ourselves off more and more from the rest of the world, and this makes our inviting others to know Jesus even more important, but also more difficult, because we've cut ourselves off from that. It's essential that people find Christ. All these new gadgets are hindering this search, I think, more and more. Folks, we are the church of Jesus Christ. We are the church of the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. We have something that people can't find anywhere else. And Jesus has called all Christians to go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. What do you do with those disciples? Those people who are students, what's what that means, a teachable student? They learn, and they obey, and become children of God. See, through his church, Jesus is urging us to invite others to come to know him so that they might get to know salvation through that knowledge. Inviting people to meet Jesus, natural, audacious, simple, and certain. It's a great lesson if you ever get the chance to think about it. Jesus will show up, folks, if we open the door. And right now, sometimes I think we look at this idea and we think, well, it's hard to do. Well, it's not a hard sell. It's just a gracious invitation. Right now, too many of our friends, neighbors, and co-workers and family members are still sleeping. Right now, too many of them are watching Sunday morning talk shows and reading the paper or trying to recover from a painful hangover. Andrew found the Messiah, and so have we. And when he found him, Andrew went and brought one other person, and that's our challenge. That's our challenge. Be like Andrew. Bring one. Everyone, bring one. Somebody asked me one time, how do you double the size of a congregation in such a short time? I said, everybody bring one. Wouldn't that, I think that does it, doesn't it? Everybody bring one. That's our responsibility. Talk to people about the most important thing in your life. You do anyway. So stop and think about it. We've got the greatest story ever told, and we need to be excited about it. We need to move to bring others to know that story, and it needs to permeate from our lives. Question: are we afraid of bringing people with us to worship because we don't think they will see Jesus? Or maybe because they can't see Jesus being reflected in our lives? What do you see when you look in a spiritual mirror? You see yourself, or do you see Jesus? I mean, let's give ourselves a big challenge this week. Let's think of someone we know who does not have a church home. I'm not even talking about somebody that you know goes all the time. I'm talking about somebody that just, you know, sits at home by themselves, doesn't go anywhere. And follow the example of Andrew and tell them about Jesus. Let's invite them to come and see. Let's invite them. Who is this Jesus? And tell him who he is and who he should be for them as well. I don't know about you, but let's show them. Let's show them Jesus. The prophecy fulfilled. I don't know where you are spiritually this morning, but I do know this. Each one of us can step out tomorrow morning, or maybe even this afternoon, with a whole new attitude. But like I said this earlier, no one can change me except me. And no one can change you except you. You're the only one that can give yourself to Jesus. The question is are you willing to do that? Are you willing to put your life in his hands and carry him to the world and invite the world to come and see? I don't know where you are, but there's a fountain free waiting for you. Won't you come?